Hello, and on behalf of the League of Women Voters, I would like to welcome you to this Colorado 3rd Congressional District candidate interview. My name is Wendy Pollock, and I'm on the board of directors of the La Plata County chapter and a resident of Durango. The League of Women Voters is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that does not support or oppose candidates or political parties. Our mission is to empower voters and to defend democracy. Also with us is journalist Sarah Flower, who will serve as our interviewer. Sarah is a freelance journalist with extensive experience in nonpartisan coverage of important issues affecting Southwest and Western Colorado. Thank you, Sarah, for working with the League on this unique opportunity for voters to learn about the candidates for this congressional seat. The 3rd Congressional District, also known as CD3, is the largest geographical district in Colorado. The district includes most of the rural western slope in the western 1/3 of the state. It encompasses 29 counties, including numerous cities and towns, as well as unincorporated communities. CD3 also is home to 2 Native American tribes, the Mountain Ute tribe and the Southern Ute tribe. The population of our district is just over 750,000 people based on the 2020 census. CD3 is one of 8 congressional districts in Colorado. To maximize the content of these interviews, they may be presented in 2 segments for each candidate. The segments for all candidates will be available for on-demand viewing via leagueofwomenvoterscolorado.org, vote411.org, public radio stations and media outlets throughout the district, and through the League of Women Voters websites within CD3. This interview may not be recorded without the express permission of the League of Women Voters. No excerpts may be used in any form by individuals, candidates, or political parties. Each of the candidates will be asked the same questions so viewers can compare and contrast responses from the candidates. The questions were gathered across CD3 and vetted by a nonpartisan committee of League of Women Voters members to represent a cross-section of the district. The views expressed during this interview are those of the candidates and not those of the League of Women Voters or the interviewer. If you have any additional questions for the candidates, we would encourage you to contact them directly. Joining us for this interview is Adam Frisch from the Democratic Party. Well, let's begin, Sarah, and I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy. I appreciate it. And thank you, Adam Frisch, for joining us. The goal of this interview is to present the views of the candidates seeking CD3 seat in a fair, nonpartisan setting so that you, the voter, can make an informed voting decision. No candidates have been given the questions in advance. I encourage you to listen carefully to the candidates' responses. Did they answer the question? Does their response indicate an understanding of the issue? Each candidate will be given 2 minutes to answer each question. In addition, we have a set of yes or no lightning round questions. For the lightning round, candidates will be allowed 1 sentence of explanation. Candidates will have 3 minutes to answer our final question as a closing statement. Adam, let's begin. Our first question is, with a 2-minute response, is in the current presidential race, both candidates are proposing strategies for reducing the cost of living. What specific ideas would you propose that Congress could act on to help residents of CD3 and the country cope with rising costs?
Okay, well, Sarah, thanks for being in journalism. Big fan down there, and to Beth and Wendy and everyone else at the League of Women Voters, thanks for what you are all doing in these important times. Sarah, I've driven 70,000 miles in the past 2.5 years on the road, 25 days a month, roughly, over the past couple of years. Luckily, I've been doing them with my son, Felix, who's now 18 years old. He's going to defer college for a year, and I've racked up about 50,000 miles with him. And the number one conversation that comes up all the time, as you know, Sarah, as well, is just this cost of living, the affordable housing, groceries, childcare, parental care, healthcare. We're all just being hammered out here. And there's this assumption when you get outside the big cities that life's just easier and cheaper. And I think we all can attest that's not the case. A lot of times we have limited options. And when you have limited supply, and limited choices, you end up paying more a lot. Is just how the marketplace works out. So, a couple things. One is housing. We need to figure out how to increase the supply. I have a bit of an economics background, and I can vouch that the demand is not going to change anytime soon in Western and Southern Colorado. So we need to figure out supply. That is a couple points. One is I am here to encourage people at the local level, because the local levels need to be making the decisions on the land use code and the density in those conversations. Southwest Colorado, Colorado's third district should not have DC and Denver people telling the local people how to set up their land use. Two, we need to make sure that there are funds available to do that. And obviously, there's public-private partnerships. I was down in Archuleta, in Pagosa Springs. There's a great example down there. I know in Durango, there's a refurbishment of a mobile home park that is being upgraded to make sure that those at the more meager level of income have the ability to get into that. And we need to make sure that some of that taxpayer dollars that we send to DC get returned and reinvest in this community to make sure there's more housing
That
supply.
is.
Piggybacking on the rising cost is affordable housing. It's a huge problem, as you touched on, for residents of Colorado and across the country. Is there a role for the federal government in establishing programs for income qualified home buyers and renters, creating affordable housing tax incentives for home builders, and or imposing tax penalties for non-resident owners?
Yeah, not only is there a role, should there be a role, there already is a role, and I think people just need to understand that. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture is actually one of the biggest players, if you will, especially focused on rural aspects of trying to build more attainable housing. And for someone who spent over a decade in my own community in the Western Slope working on affordable housing, I can tell everyone about how important it is and my experience in it, especially in the past 3 or 4 or 5 years. This is not just a resort community affordable housing conversation, and it's not just in Durango. I was just down in Ignacio the other day, in Toyac as well, and Dinosaur and Mancus. Everyone is struggling to try to figure out how to get more housing. Again, we have to focus on the supply. So there are a tremendous amount of opportunities at the federal level, and it really comes down to, again, the money and the programs to do it. And I'm still a big believer that at the city council level and the local housing authorities, they're the ones that are best to understand what the community wants for density and zoning, and I'm fully supportive of that. But there are resources available, and if those resources are not being asked for Western and Southern Colorado, they're going to be going to Denver, they're going to be going to Detroit, they're going to be going to rural Tennessee. So we want to have someone in Congress that's going to advocate to make sure those funds, those funding, and those resources come back to make sure that there's housing, because I think we can all agree if one does not have stable housing, it's really hard to have a stable life.
Question 3. The Inflation Reduction Act was a good first step towards addressing the climate crisis. What do you see, Adam, as Congress's next step to continue addressing the climate crisis and reducing global warming gases from being emitted and the negative impacts felt by farmers and ranchers?
I think one thing we can all agree on, no matter what you believe from a political standpoint or not that politically active, it's hotter and drier in Western and Southern Colorado. There's no denying it. That is the case. I hear this from the ranchers. I hear this from the farmers, whether I'm in Rangeley or in La Plata County. And so I think water is the number one thing that we all need to focus on. Anyone who's serious about being in leadership in the Western and Southern Colorado needs to realize water is it. And we need to continue to have those conversations about water. And people realize, oh, you don't have blue horns, I don't have red horns. We can figure out how to kind of build a consensus and find common ground. So from water, we can kind of figure out where else to go. So it's really important for agriculture, for farming, for ranching, for conservation, for biodiversity, for recreation, for tourism, for domestic energy production. We need to make sure as much water stays in the Western Slope and Southern Colorado as possible. And we are not going to solve Colorado's water issues on the back of the Western Slope. And just like I don't want to solve the Colorado River Compact's issues, which includes California, Nevada, and Arizona, on the back of Colorado as a whole. We're the only state in the entire 48 lower district that does not have any water coming into it. Colorado is a 100% water exporter. Whether it's the Rio Grande River that goes down in Texas and Mexico, that starts up in our district. Rio Grande, and the Arkansas also starts up in our district, let alone the Colorado River. So we have to make sure that we protect it. One of the best things we can do, outside of the water conversation is Colorado remains one of the best and cleanest and most responsible places to produce energy, whether it's solar, whether it's wind, or whether it is natural gas as that transition fuel as we try to go towards to decarbonize a little bit. But Colorado produces some of the cleanest natural gas in the entire country. We're not getting solar power from Sweden. And when we shut things down in Colorado, we're asking Iran and Venezuela to bail out the rest of the world. And that's not a good thing to do for our climate or our national security.
We're going to switch gears here a little bit, certainly a hot button issue across the country. Given that no new immigration reforms have been enacted by Congress in many years, if elected, what would you specifically advocate for or against to address immigration reform?
Yeah, I think it's been in the mid 80s since the last time we actually had a conversation about it and got some things done. And at that time, most of the immigration conversation was about individual, mostly males, mostly coming from Mexico, coming over to work, and then sometimes staying, but a lot of times going back. And one of the most important things I learned, actually, I was just down on the border a couple weeks ago. I was in McAllen, Texas for a couple days. No camera crew. I just went down there to listen, to learn, talk to some of the border agents, Republican mayors, Democratic judicial clerks, spent some time with some ranchers and farmers that own land on both sides. We drove around in his pickup truck and we actually went through the gate to see what was going on down there, to listen and learn. Without a doubt, we need to have a safe, secure border that provides an orderly process for people that want to come here. The fairness is really, really important, but that can be done in a very humane way, and that we need to make sure we never lose our core values of who we are as Americans. But as my grandparents on my dad's side and my great grandparents on my mom's side can attest, it's really important for us to make sure that we remain a welcoming place, but it has to be done in an orderly fashion. The second thing is it's an economically imperative that we have a sane and safe and orderly immigration policy without a doubt. And again, we can secure the border at the same time because our ranchers and our farmers and our healthcare workers and everyone in hospitality, all those industries are short of workers. And we have a lot of people that have a long history, multi-generations of them coming over. Specifically, we need to figure out how to increase and streamline the H-2A visa program that is focused on agriculture, as well as H-2B visas as well, to make sure people come up and do it. The most heartbreaking thing, Sarah, I learned when I was coming down there is basically the cartels in Mexico are running basically a human trafficking complex that was not there 20, 30 years ago. And whether it's drugs or people, the cartels don't care. And it's really a hardship and a heartfelt message down there that we need to make sure that we break through that trafficking industry that is hurting so many families.
Great, thank you. Do you think that the federal government should have a role in education in our country? Please explain your views. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. My wife ended up being a member of our school board up here right before COVID started, unbeknownst to her. And when COVID started, I went and got my substitute 3 year substitute teaching license and grabbed a mask and got in there in that classroom a couple days a week. I focused on pre-K 4. As someone who has teenagers, I still wanted to spend some time that people wanted to still hold my hand, which was really important to do at the school district. And obviously, COVID was a huge hammer away at education. Obviously, the majority of funding from school districts come from the state level. And one of the things I'm very, very focused on is there's no reason the kids in Toyac, and I spent some time down there in their new child care center as well in their elementary school, as well as in Ignacio, as well as up in Mancus or up in Dinosaur. They should have the same educational opportunities as the kids in Durango and Telluride and Cherry Creek and Denver and the wealthier suburbs up there. So that's what public schools, the backbone of our country's ability for opportunity, and that remains. I do not want the federal government getting involved in what should be taught. That should not come from Denver and DC. That's for the local school boards to focus on. But there still needs to be a Department of Education to make sure that the funding is in place, that the states are doing a good job. And as great as our state of Colorado is, one of the most troubling aspects of it from financially is that we are still ranked 47th or 48th in school funding per pupil. And that goes back to not that people in Cherry Creek or probably in Telluride or Steamboat are losing out, but that is affecting the people in Durango and Toyac, Ignacio, as well as in the San Luis Valley, which are some of our least well-off counties, not just in the state, but in the entire country. And we need to make sure that every kid has a chance to learn, and making sure that that teacher pay is at a level to make sure we can attract as well as retain a really great teacher force.
Right. A couple more in this section here.
Sure.
Given the increase in school and other mass shootings, what step would you take to lower the rate of gun-related violence in our country?
Yeah, thank you. You know, as a father, and a brother and a husband, and as said, as a school teacher, I fully, with sincerity, it's heartbreaking when we read about these stories that happen, especially at the schools. You know, another something that's underappreciated is I think about almost 60% of all gun deaths in the country are suicides. And our ranchers and farmers are starting to surpass veterans in suicide rates, um, given the desperation and isolation, the economic hardship of those of us outside the big cities. It's really challenging. And a good amount of the remainder of those gun deaths are a lot of domestic violence, not solely, but almost all affecting women that are vulnerable. And so I'm very, very focused on who has a gun as opposed to what they have in their hand. And at the end of the day, it's much easier to try to figure out how to keep guns from people that shouldn't have them than trying to figure out how to ban a certain type of a firearm and have that firearm changed by 0.001%, and all of a sudden it doesn't become, it goes from illegal to legal, as well as we already have hundreds of millions of guns out there in society. So my focus remains, as we've seen in the state of Colorado as well, but we need to make sure that who has a gun is where I think we need to focus on. And also, I think there's just a lot more bipartisan buy-in to focus on reducing suicide rates, reducing the domestic violence, and that will also start to, then we can really kind of focus on the mental instability of those people that are committing some of these horrible, tragic episodes that are way too prevalent in our country, let alone in the state of Colorado.
Right. Last question for the series. In many parts of our district, certainly here in Southwest Colorado, the healthcare and mental health care needs of all residents are not being met. Do you envision a time when a single payer healthcare system might be the most effective and equitable method of delivering affordable and quality care for the American public? If not, why? If so, how do you think we could get there?
You know, I need to focus on the rural aspects of healthcare. For someone that was born on an Indian reservation, myself in Fort Peck Indian Reservation in northeastern Montana. My dad was in the Indian Health Service for 5 years. He went on to become an OBGYN, worked for Planned Parenthood after that. I can vouch from day one how important it is to have good, solid rural healthcare. And when I'm down in Cortez a year ago talking to some of the doctors, right as almost their birthing center got shut down, as well as people that actually wanted to work there that had to leave because they couldn't figure out how to make it work. And a lot of us in Colorado in third district, we have more in common with rural Tennessee than we do with these big cities of Denver and Boulder and Fort Collins. So I think it's really, really important to realize that while everyone has healthcare access issues because of the cost of insurance and the cost of medical care, those of us in the rural parts of Colorado have geographical access issues too. And I think if we want to really move the needle, it's getting on subcommittees and committees, working with Republicans and Democrats in Wyoming, in Montana, and Tennessee that have like minded issues and try to figure out how to improve that. That to me is a much better way than moving the needle. And instead of trying to get in some really, really big, complicated conversations, I just don't see going anywhere about trying to get back to getting rid of the private. I do not want to get rid of the private insurance companies, the industry. They certainly need to be reformed. We certainly need more competition, especially in Western and Southern Colorado. But I think there's a lot of strides that can continue to be furthered along, and especially in mental health. It's the number one issue I hear about that I was not planning on hearing about. And it goes back to, as I said before, we have ranchers and farmers that are surpassing veterans in suicide rates. And unlike orthopedics and some other aspects, mental health care does not make any money. And that's why we have a mental health care desert in rural Colorado. And I want to focus on that.
Great. That concludes the 2-minute portion. The next one coming up is my favorite. It is the lightning round. So these are yes or no questions, and you
Sure.
have one sentence to follow up if needed. You ready,
Okay.
Adam?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Are you in favor of a path to citizenship for immigrants defined as dreamers who are living in our country?
Yes, we can secure the border and still honor those kids that were born here under without their control. They're already they're already integrated into our schools and our economy.
Question 2. Do you support term limits for the Supreme Court?
Yes, I think it's the only reform that actually has a chance of getting passed.
Do you support raising the national minimum wage?
Yes, it's at $7. I think we have to be careful about local economies and state economies, but at $7 an hour, that's $14,000 a year.
Given the issues surrounding campaign finance, would you support the proposed legislation, the Disclose Act, that would provide disclosure of campaign spending and combat the issue of so-called dark money in U.S. elections?
I'm blessed to be supported by End Citizens United. We're not taking any corporate PAC money, and I've signed the term limit pledge.
Question 6. Are you in favor of using federal lands for the construction of affordable housing?
I think we have to, there's a lot of lands out there, and 2/3 of our district or so is federal lands in appropriate places that are close to urban growth boundaries. It's an interesting conversation.
Would you support the Equal Rights Amendment becoming the 28th Amendment?
No brainer. Yes.
Do you support passage of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that would strengthen legal protections against discriminatory voting policies and practices?
Yes. I want as many people voting as possible, whether they're voting for me or not.
And last one, are you in favor of a national policy of protecting abortion rights?
Yes. If men can get pregnant, this conversation would not have started 100 years ago.
That concludes the lightning round, Adam Frisch. We're on to our final question with closing remarks. We've covered several issues on a range of topics. In your opinion, what are the top 3 issues facing our congressional district? And briefly describe how you plan to address these issues if elected.
Okay. Thank you very much again to the League of Women Voters. I think there's a couple themes that are affecting everyone in CD3. One is the partisanship that is overtaking our country. People are exhausted. One of the reasons I got in this race to take on Representative Boebert was this angertainment aspect of politics. And as a husband and as a father and a small business owner and a Colorado and an American, I just don't have any room for partisanship politics. And I am on, this is not to me about Team Republican or Team Democrat, it's about Team CD3. So that's just an overall theme and a mindset of how I'm going to go into and find common ground. People can hold on to their values, but there's a lot of common ground out there. One of the things I learned after driving, I feel like I've done a 70,000-mile focus group, and I can vouch there's a lot more in common than not, whether I'm in Rangeley or in Telluride, and I can vouch for that all day long. Specifically to issues. Number one is water. We need to make sure that water, as I mentioned before, stays on the western slope, stays in southern Colorado, does not get sucked up by people in Denver, let alone leaving our state. That's something that's really important to do. 2, the cost of living, whether it is prescription drugs, whether it is childcare, whether it is the groceries, we need to figure out a way to support our local farmers and break down the food industrial complex where so much power is in so few companies of hands. Farmers used to get paid about 30 cents on the dollar of agricultural goods sold. Now it's less than 10 cents. And no wonder why food's gone up and our farmers and ranchers are struggling. Third, in 2 parts, obviously we talked about a humane immigration policy that still allows us to secure a border. And you brought it up, but it's been on my list. I talk about the mental health crisis, especially in the rural aspects of our country, and really the rural aspects of our district as well. Those are the issues that I want to focus on. And that's, I don't think neither party has a monopoly on good ideas, and both parties have some really bad ones. And to me, it's trying to find common ground with those that want to focus on what is important for rural Colorado and our small business owners. And that's why I'm running, and that's what I'm focused on.
Great. Thank you, Adam Frisch, who is running on the Democratic ticket for Congressional District 3. I appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today and getting to know a little bit more about you.
Thank you very much, all.
We're going to switch it over back to the League of Women Voters to wrap it up for today's candidate spotlight.
Well, thank you to Sarah and to Adam Frisch. Really appreciate that. Well, in closing, the League of Women Voters would like to remind those watching or listening to this interview that the views expressed are those of the candidate, not those of the League of Women Voters or the interviewer. Prior to casting your vote, we encourage all voters to learn more and do their own research on any of the statements made by the candidates during their interview. To find out more about candidates' positions on issues, we recommend that you visit vote411.org, ballotpedia.org, the League of Women Voters Colorado.org, and the websites of your local chapter of the League of Women Voters. We encourage you to check these resources frequently as we get closer to Election Day for additional information. Ballots are scheduled to be mailed October 11th. If you don't receive your ballot by mid-October, contact your county clerk. Election Day is November 5th. You can also go on to govotecolorado.gov to check your registration status. Remember, how you vote is up to you. We encourage voters to vote in every election and to be as well informed as possible when casting their ballot. And that concludes our interview today. Thank you for watching and listening, and thank you for being an engaged citizen.